Okay, all right. Well, good to talk to you here today, and trying to get set up here with a microphone. So make sure that you can hear me okay. I was not too happy with the sound levels in the previous video. So let's see how this one is. And so maybe a little bit of an extreme close-up on this one. So good to talk to you today. We're kind of getting into the meat here of the class. Today we're going to talk about in this video, we're going to talk about the needs analysis meeting. So the first time you're going to sit down with your buyer or your buyers, and or if you're going to do it on the telephone. So I've got my slides all prepared. So let's go ahead and do the share screen. And it looks like we have some cooperation today from the backstage crew. Anybody remember that? Well, excuse me. Can I just have a blue spot, right? See if you can go back and find that video. Okay, the buyer course for realtors, the needs analysis meeting. So I want to do a quick review after we've done a few videos here so far. Number one, people are going to choose you to be their realtor because they like you, they trust you, and you have the expertise. Don't ever forget that. That is going to apply to everything you do as a realtor when you're coming into contact with potential customers, either face-to-face, online, the world of social media, videos, whatever it is. It's going to be, that's the foundation of why people are going to choose to be with you, to use you as a realtor. Like you, trust you, and you have the expertise. We talked about there's many different types of buyers: first-time buyers, relocation, move up, downsizing, seniors, military, investors, second home buyers, luxury buyers. Everything that I'm talking about in this course is applicable to all buyers. Doesn't matter what segment they're in, what niche they're in, it's going to apply to all buyers. You want to schedule the meeting that we're going to talk about now with everyone, with all buyers, referrals, family. I mean, I've helped family, helped my dad, I've helped my brother and his wife, my dad and his wife. But when they were looking at houses, we had a meeting in my office to go through what was important to them. It's just like a doctor doing a diagnosis, just like a lawyer doing a preliminary meeting. We do the same thing. So referrals, friends, family, you meet somebody in an open house, you chit chat with them, you develop a relationship, you still schedule the meeting. Web leads, all buyers, don't skip this step, okay? I'm really being kind of hardcore here, but it is so important to have this meeting. And now we're going to kind of dig into it. So when you have the first meeting, this is the most important meeting that you're going to have with your buyers, because you're going to build a case, just like a lawyer, why they want to buy. You're going to identify their buying criteria. What is important to them? You ask good questions and you listen, okay? You use the power of silence. You don't just keep jabbering and jabbering and jabbering, right? Ask good questions and listen. And when they ask you questions, answer them, but be brief. Don't use that as an opportunity to go off on some tangent and speak for 20 minutes. Answer it briefly, get them back on track when they ask questions. You want to keep them talking. So what I try to identify up front when I'm meeting with the buyer the first time, we want to identify their current situation, where they are today. Where do they live? Are they renting? When is their lease up? Do they currently own a home? Do they need to sell that existing home? What is the timeline for their new home? What is their financing plans? Are they talking to a lender? Can they own two homes? What are their jobs and where do they work geographically? Now, if you dig into all these questions here, you're going to be able to kind of qualify them and be able to understand their situation. Because if it's a renter, then you know their situation. If they own a home and they need to sell it, then you know what you're up against, right? If they own a home and they can buy a new one without selling their existing one, that's great, okay? Identify what is their current situation. And then this is, to me, this is the heart of it right here. You know, why do they want to buy a new home? Because they need a compelling reason. They need to be motivated. If you're working with a buyer and they're just kind of like, you know, when somebody goes out and looks at cars, or you go out and look at computers in the computer store, or you're looking at TVs, you know, a lot of window shopping, right? I do that. I was at Best Buy last weekend and I was looking at computers and I was looking at TVs. You know, maybe I'll buy a new computer. Definitely not going to buy a TV, but I'm just out there kind of checking it out. So what you want in a buyer, you want them to have a compelling and motivating reason why they want to buy a new house, okay? The lease is ending for the renter. You're meeting with a potential buyer in April, May. Their lease is ending the end of August. That's a good buyer, right? You want somebody like that because they're motivated. They're going to be out on the street if they don't buy a new home. And that is the ideal situation. They need a bigger home. So maybe it's a move up buyer. They had another kid. Maybe somebody from the family is going to come live with them. Maybe they want to buy a bigger home. They got a promotion, whatever it is. But they want a bigger home. They want a smaller home. They're downsizing. If they're moving and relocating, have a job change, those are ideal, right? If you got somebody moving into your area and they're relocating due to a job change and they're going to start working at a new company, they could be in temporary housing. Maybe the company provides them a couple months and then after that, they need to be in their new home. That's a great buyer. You want a buyer who is motivated, has a reason why they want to buy a new home, okay? Then after you identify their current situation, you identify why they want to buy a new home. And when you go through that, like I said, you let them talk. You don't interrupt and you don't try to sell there because what's going to happen, you're going to see an opening and they're going to say, yeah, we want to move to this area. What do you think about it? And then your tendency is to start talking right there and selling. You just be brief and just say, oh yeah, you know, where I live in the Boulder, Louisville area, oh, it's a nice area. Yeah, I've helped a lot of people buy in this area. I've helped a lot of people move from out of state. But let me understand a little bit more about your situation. See how I did that? I kind of sold a little bit, but then I went back to them. I don't want to sell yet, okay? Current situation, why they want to buy, but now they're buying criteria. This is when you roll up the sleeves, right? You got your notepad ready. You ask if you can take notes. You take good notes. You let them talk. And this is where you ask the open-ended questions. What would you like in an ideal home? What is important to you in a new home? What don't you like about your current house? What do you like best about your current house? Talk about commute issues. What is ideal from a commuting standpoint? Talk a little bit about schools, if they have kids, and even if they don't have kids, and if they don't plan on having kids, it's still a relevant point because I mean, years ago I helped somebody and they were moving here from St. Louis. And when they bought their house in St. Louis, they didn't have any kids and they were never going to have any kids. But they bought their house in St. Louis in a really not ideal area for public schools. It didn't rate as well as some of the other school districts. And their house was such that 80 to 90% of the people that were going to be looking at it were families with kids. And so what happened is it really affected their resale value because they were in a bad school district. So even though if I'm talking to people, they don't have kids, they don't plan on having kids, public schools is still something that we want to have as a part of the discussion. Now, the buying criteria section, I like to spend at least 20 to 30 minutes just letting them talk. And if you're with a couple and, whatever the couple is, you let both of them talk, right? If one is dominating the conversation, and I know I had one of these, I think like last year, and I think the husband just kept talking and talking and talking, and the wife was really quiet and she didn't say anything. So after like about 10, 15 minutes of the husband talking about what was important to him, I turned to her and I said, well, what do you think? What's important to you? So that way you have to engage both people or however many people are involved in the buying process. And I think that is something that you'll just kind of identify as you're talking about, whoever's going to be there. And if you've got like, like a young single person and maybe they're getting help from one of their parents most likely is going to be in the meeting and they're going to talk about what's going to be important to them too, because they want to make sure that their child is making a good investment. Okay, like I said, write everything down, take good notes, okay? So you just want to keep them talking and you want to listen, okay? Once you go through those 3 steps, then at this point, this is when I say, I can help you. And then you kind of go in a little bit about yourself. You talk about how third-party stories are very powerful. I just helped another family. They relocated here from California, just like you. I helped this other couple, young couple last year. They were first-time home buyers, just like you. I helped this other family. They were looking at moving up. They wanted a bigger home and they looked at moving from this city to this other city. See, you talk about your situations of how you've helped other people. That way that you're building your credibility, but then also the person you're talking to, they can see themselves in the other people that you helped. And they're like, oh, Mario helped that other person. He can definitely help me. And so that's a very powerful tool. And then I talk a little bit about how I work, kind of my style. I talk about why other buyers like working with me and what they found to be kind of my strengths. I want to set expectations for the process. I always want to mention there's going to be bumps in the road. Not every house that we write a contract on, we're going to get it. I mean, that's just the nature of the business. And depending on where you are, what your market is, I mean, my market here in the Denver Boulder area, the past couple of years, very, very competitive. Not unusual to see 10, 15 offers at a time, for one property. So you want to be able to set expectations up front that we're going to run into some bumps in the road. I talk a little bit about how realtor commissions work and depending on your area. And for here, most of the sellers, they all pay the buyer co-op to the buyer's agent. New construction, same thing. For sale by owner, 98% of for sale by owners, we're going to do a buyer co-op. And so you're going to be covered. But I just want to kind of go through that with them. I do want to make a point that when they go to new construction that I can help them. And a lot of times with some of the builders, they want the buyer to come in with the lender on the first visit. I know it's Mickey Mouse, it's kind of crazy, but be aware of that and let them know that up front. You can do a presentation. I know some buyer agents, they can do like a PowerPoint and they can go through how they help people after they've kind of done the first 3 steps that I talked about. Give them a home buying guide. Talked about that before. You have your own home buying guide. You can maybe get something from your office that's been created, and maybe you kind of take the template that they have, customize it with your kind of content, your value add, and how you work. But you want to give them something hard copy, because if they're going to have that meeting with you, make sure that they get something hard copy. And if it's a relocation buyer, relocation guide, some kind of guide, investor buyer, investor guide, and that way they have something. Now, lastly, when you're kind of talking about how you can help them, you want to set the expectations that you work by referral. So what you can say is that, you know, I'm going to help you and I expect everything to work out in the end. And I work primarily by referral. So after I help you, you buy your house down the road, I would like it when you hear of other people looking to buy a house, to let them know about me and I can help them. Now I want you to notice I didn't say the word please, okay? I'm a big believer in not begging. Don't say please. Don't say please, refer people to me, okay? You're a professional. The expectation should be you do a good job. You expect to have referrals. That's it, okay? Pretty straightforward. And then after I go through that, I ask, do you have any other questions? Okay, after you kind of give your brief presentation, let them ask questions. Again, answer them briefly. Let them have an opportunity to ask what they want. Use silence to kind of pull it out from them. Make sure if it's a couple to get both to talk. And I talked about that, okay? Now, after we kind of go through these steps, I'll talk a little bit about the buyer agency agreement. So if you want to be a buyer's agent, now first off, I'm not a managing broker. I'm not your managing broker. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not giving you legal advice. So the first thing I'd like you to do is make sure that you follow what your managing broker says you're supposed to do. Follow your office policy in regards to a buyer agency agreement. A lot of companies, a lot of brokers, they want to make sure that you give the brokerage disclosure to the buyer, kind of definition of duties and responsibilities. You can email that to people. I do that a lot of time. The way I do it is that my expectation is, and I'm talking to the buyer now, is I commit to you and then you're going to commit to me. At some point, you're going to need to buy and buy a home, right? At some point, you will need to sign the buyer agency agreement so I can represent you. Usually the way I do it is I like to take you out on at least 1 to 2 showings, go out and look at some homes, make sure that you're comfortable with me, and then make sure that I'm comfortable with you. We have a good relationship, and then at that time we can do a buyer agency. And once I do that then, because I've already talked about the commissions and how the commissions work, sales resistance is the highest when you meet somebody the first time. That's just the nature of the sales relationship. A lot of times people say, I'm going to go see a realtor. And then somebody else say, well, make sure you don't sign anything. Just make sure you listen to them, but don't sign anything. Your parents might say that if you're a younger buyer. Well, go listen to what Mario has to say, but, don't sign anything. So their sales resistance is really high the first time. If you ask them to sign a disclosure, I tell people anytime the word disclosure is on an agreement, it's not a contract. And if you're signing a disclosure, all you're doing is basically saying that you've read it and you've received it. That's it, not a contract. So I rarely will have anybody sign a buyer agency agreement the first time I meet with them. Now, once I go through all that, you want to schedule the next step. This is so important. You don't want to just have the meeting kind of end up and say, okay, well, give me a call next week, or, I'll email you next week or whatever. No, that doesn't work. right there at the meeting, you schedule the next step. Now, I talked about it before. Maybe you're having this needs analysis meeting right before you go out and look at properties. And I do that quite a bit, especially when I'm meeting people on the weekend and it's the first time we're going out. We might meet in my office for like 30 minutes. We go through the needs analysis, and then I have 5 or 6 homes or however many properties are available to look at, kind of based on their criteria that we went over just kind of briefly, maybe in an email or a phone call, but I always want to have that needs analysis, even if I'm going to go out and look with somebody. But if you're doing this on the weekend or in the evening and you're going to do another showing in the future, schedule that, okay? Give them the home buying guide. I always tell people, I'm going to give you a quiz, make sure that you read it. And I'm going to ask you questions about it because it is important. Have them, if they don't have a lender, contact a lender and get pre-approved. Usually I'll give them one lender that I know will work well with them based on their situation. Get them, if you do this, you can get them on automated updates when new listings come up on the MLS, so they can get that in email. Most companies now have that through their MLS or through their own company, so you can do that. Pretty easy to do. If you're not tech savvy, you can ask your managing broker, somebody in your office, maybe somebody in the office staff, they can help you get that set up. And then schedule the showing tour, get this scheduled. So if I'm meeting somebody on a Saturday and we can only do it on the weekends based on the work schedule, I'll either do it in the evening if it's in the spring or the summer, if there's enough light in the sky, or we just do it the following weekend. Keep moving forward like a shark, right? You always want to keep moving forward. Every time you're with a buyer, you're always scheduling the next step. Now I want you to role play this needs analysis meeting, because the better you're going to get at it, the more locked in you're going to get in with your buyers. So practice this with other agents in your office. I've done this before, and I've always felt that I learn so much more when I'm the buyer. So when I sit down and I'm the buyer and another realtor is there blabbering on and asking me questions, I'm like, man, this is how it feels. So I feel what the buyer is going through. So make sure when you role play, do it back and forth a few times. Do it colleagues in your office, work with your managing broker, sit in and observe other agents. So if you have other agents in your office who are generous and kind enough to let you sit in on initial meeting with the buyer, just sit there, you're quiet as a mouse, you don't talk unless you're spoken to, and then you can observe that. The initial buyer meeting is so important, okay? You want to be ready when it counts, all right? So make sure that you role play and you get better. So I think that's it for this one here. Yep, there's all my stuff. And again, practice all this. You're going to get better. Role play. Follow everything that I talk about in this kind of roadmap, and you're going to get better. Okay, make sure you listen. Make sure you don't talk all the time. When we get nervous, we have a tendency to talk, talk, talk. We don't want to do that, right? We just want to sit back. We want to listen. We want to build that relationship and make sure that, they're locked in with us. And I didn't write this there, but this kind of goes without saying, like you, trust you, and you have the expertise. As a part of this, you want to be building the relationship. You want to be building rapport. And I didn't feel like I had to put that there. Make sure you ask where they went to school and who's their favorite sports team, and ask about their kids. I mean, a lot of that comes natural to us as kind of servants. We're serving people, we're realtors, we're helping them get what they want. Show interest in them. You're helping them. Don't always talk about yourself. You can share stories about yourself, and I always do that. I mean, I share about my wife being an engineer, not being able to make a decision. I share about my daughters, all the things I do, taking them around. If I've got some commonality with my mom or my dad or some ethnic thing or whatever it is, I talk about that. If people come from the East Coast and they come from Virginia, Washington, D.C., I talk about that. I mean, every region you can talk about something. Oh, yeah, you're from California? I go to California all the time. So that, like I said, that kind of goes without saying. And I didn't feel it was necessary for me to put that there in the notes. But you're building rapport, you're building a relationship because they like you, they trust you, and you have the expertise. Okay, well, that's it for this module. And I've kind of lost track of the module numbers. So here we go to the next one.